When you think of the Iron Age and the Roman period in Gaul, you think about people like Vercingetorix and Julius Caesar. You think about the Roman military equipment, including the large scutum, the pilum throwing javelin, the gladius sword, and then you think about the longer swords, the kind of proto-Sparthas, the Anteni swords, used by the Gauls against the Romans. And indeed, the Gauls were famous also for mail or chainmail armour, and they were pretty well armoured and very well equipped. But what you probably don't think about is boomerangs. So that's right, today on the Archaeology of Weapons news here on Schola Gladiatoria channel, we're going to be looking at the Gallic boomerang. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. Now first up I'll just say, I'm finding it quite difficult to get videos cranked out at the moment because it's summer holidays, the kids are off school, I've got actual holidays going on as well, vacations and stuff, but moreover I've had fight camp and other things happening in my life, so it's been quite difficult. However, I have been trying to keep up with weapons archaeology news. As a former archaeologist myself, and obviously as a antique arms and armour dealer and HEMA instructor and reenactor and various things that I do, clearly I keep an eye out, and this story really piqued my interest. So at site I immediately saw this thing and I thought, well, that's boomerang shaped. I opened the article, and indeed what we're looking at here is supposedly a essentially Roman era or Gallic Latin period French, we'll call it French, we'll unpack that term in a second, Northern French, so found in Normandy, boomerang. Now before we look at the article and actually some of the details of this extraordinary artefact, which I'm actually very interested to learn more about, we should first talk about throwing sticks. Okay, so when most people use the term boomerang, they think of the Aboriginal Australian weapon, or indeed perhaps they think of a sporting or toy item which is designed to come back to you. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, boomerangs as we know them do essentially come from Australia. Okay, in terms of their popularity spreading around the world in modern times, in modern history. However, various forms of throwing stick have been used since prehistory around the world. It's not only an Aboriginal Australian thing, in the same way that the Aborigines used a form of atlatl, essentially a form of spear throwing device, a spear thrower, and they used wooden shields and they had wooden swords and various other things. They used mostly, well, only pretty much wooden weapons. They didn't, as far as we know, probably invent the bow, but they had a whole bunch of other interesting weapons that they were still using in the 19th century when European settlers turned up and documented these things, and in some cases many of these have ended up in museums or photographed or whatever. So we know a fair amount about Australian Aboriginal weapons, but many of the weapons that the Aborigines used in Australia have very similar parallels in other parts of the world from other periods of time. I'm kind of trying to avoid the word history here because generally speaking that refers to written history, and obviously a lot of these organic material weapons, whether they're made of wood or bone or horn or antler or whatever, are prehistoric, they're pre-written source. So we do have archaeological evidence for throwing clubs, but equally we have anthropological evidence, that is, evidence from known and documented cultures that were written about by, for example, European scientists. We know, for example, in places like Fiji, Papua New Guinea, various other places, throwing clubs were used. We also know that throwing clubs were used in both North and South Americas by Aboriginal groups, but in addition to that, they were used in Europe. Now, I think a lot of people, as I say, when you think about a boomerang, don't think about prehistoric or kind of rather in this case Iron Age Europeans. But the fact is, even in the Middle Ages, we know that sometimes clubs and maces and axes and other things were thrown. We can even see a form of mace or club being thrown on the Bayeux Tapestry circa 1066. Well, it's obviously dates a year or two after 1066, but we know therefore that throwing sticks of various sorts go back an awful long way. Now, an important point to make is, while this was done in war, very obviously throwing sticks were predominantly used, and probably almost certainly first used, in hunting. And obviously most weapons that humans have devised, whether it's the bow or the spear, probably even you know, the axe or the club, come from tools either for hunting prey, or for, in the case of axes, for chopping up wood and chopping down trees. But can we separate those two things? Because you have to think about a tribal society where one minute you might be bringing down, you know, a large antelope or something, or deer or elk, or a horse. Obviously horses were widely eaten. And the next minute you might be fighting a rival group and you're going to use the same object, because clearly a spear that can kill a horse can also kill a human, equally for bows, axes, whatever. So throwing sticks have been used absolutely since prehistory. We have some archaeological examples, we have historical examples from as late as the medieval period in Europe, but obviously outside Europe we've got examples going all the way through to the 19th and 20th centuries. Anyway, let's get to this amazing artifact that has been found, which I had never even heard of. Certainly you'll see the specific details of this are quite particular actually. So this features in Archaeo News, and I'll put the link down below in the description. So the title is "A Boomerang in Ancient Gaul. This 2,100-year-old wooden weapon was found in France." Just to very briefly unpack that term, obviously it wasn't known as France at the time. France gets its name from the Franks, which were a later migration era movement of probably a ruling elite rather than an entire population, after the essentially fall of the Roman Empire, in the late Roman Empire. Right, so here's, I'll stick a picture up on screen of it here. So it says, "A curved wooden weapon discovered as an Iron Age settlement off the coast of Normandy, on the coast of Normandy, is offering an unusual glimpse into hunting and ritual life in ancient Europe, dating to around 120 to 80 BC. There's quite a narrow dating margin, I have to say, presumably radiocarbon dating. That's quite narrow, even for radiocarbon dating. Anyway, the object closely resembles what we would now call a boomerang, although archaeologists more precisely term it a throwing stick. So just very briefly, as a tangent, because that's what this video is essentially about, most boomerangs used in Australia by Aborigines were done for hunting. They undoubtedly use them in war as well, but most of them were used for hunting, mostly for small game and birds. And not all of them were designed to come back. So they had various forms of throwing stick, which are essentially a club that you throw. Same thing in Papua New Guinea, Fiji and elsewhere. But in addition to that, most of them just kind of go out, or they might go in a slightly curved line, but they're not designed to, you know, specifically come back to you as the kind of toy or kind of hobby versions that you might buy in a modern shop would do. The remarkable artifact comes from I'm going to struggle with the names here. Urville-Nocqueville in France's Manche region, a prosperous coastal settlement connected to maritime trade across the English Channel. It's just literally about 30 miles away from us here. According to France's National Institute for Preventative Archaeological Research, called INRAP, the object is among the most unusual discoveries made at the site. Subtitle: "A Gaulish boomerang preserved in wet ground." So for those of you who don't know, obviously my background is in archaeology. I did my degree in archaeology, and I was, for a relatively short amount of time, a working archaeologist. But obviously I've worked on lots of sites when I was a student as well. And wooden material, or organic material, not just wood, but things like horn or leather, are best preserved in waterlogged conditions where essentially there isn't enough oxygen for the things which degrade those things to operate, so they get preserved in wet ground. Ironically, metal usually fares the worst in wet ground, but organic materials, even in the sea, can be preserved. So waterlogged soil protected the wooden weapon from decay for more than 2 millennia. Archaeological analysis dates its burial to the Tène period between approximately 120 and 80 BC. So we're getting into the Roman era there. But you could say Iron Age. The object has a wingspan of about 54 centimeters. Okay, so half a meter, about that long. So it's about the size of what we typically think of as a boomerang. Okay, most boomerangs are about that length, and was carved from a single branch of an apple family wood. which is, I think, pretty interesting. If you want to make a recreation of it, go and chop down an apple tray. Its surfaces were carefully finished and decorated with 3 parallel grooves, while iron strips were later attached at several points. Now that's a really interesting thing we'll come back to in a second. Apparently to reinforce or repair it. I would say that was not to repair it, that's a very deliberate, why would you repair a piece of wood? You just make another one, wouldn't you? So that is, to me, a very deliberate addition to make it more effective. As I say, we'll come back to that. Traces of damage along its edges also support the interpretation that it had repeatedly been used as a projectile. So, despite the fact that my background is in archaeology and history, I have a bugbear with archaeologists making sweeping conclusions from what, in the grand scheme of things, is very minimal evidence, okay? A police detective would never get away with this. So just because this has damage on the edges, you can't say for certain that it was thrown. Now, absolutely it could have been. This is one explanation, but we shouldn't discount other explanations. It could have been a hand weapon. It could have been a tool of some kind. Just because it's got edge damage doesn't mean it's been thrown at stuff. Most boomerangs I've known haven't had any notable edge damage. It might actually suggest that it's more likely to be used as a hand tool or implement of some kind. Anyway, let's carry on with the article. Unlike the familiar returning boomerang, however, as I've said, a lot of historical boomerangs didn't return. The Urquell-Naqueville weapon, I think I'm pronouncing that right, was probably designed primarily for hunting rather than returning neatly to the thrower. And once again, most historical throwing sticks and boomerangs didn't return to the thrower. That was something where presumably Europeans turning up in Australia were like, wow, that one boomerang does a really cool thing. Let's make toys out of that. But most of the boomerangs didn't do that. Experimental studies suggest its shape could have produced a curved flight path and that it was particularly suited to hunting birds. Now that is an interesting point. So obviously we normally deal with weapons of war to be used in fighting, combat, dueling, stuff like this. However, as I've said, many weapons are very closely adjacent to hunting tools, okay, hunting weapons. Now, the curved path is a very interesting thing. So I mentioned a lot of these throwing sticks weren't designed to do a full 360 and come back to you, but some of them were designed to go out and do a curved path. Why? So quite simply, for anyone who has ever been hunting or anything like this, you will know that it's to do with, certainly with flying things, it's to do with having a straight path projectile meet usually a straight path prey, thing that you want to eat. Now, those creatures are sentient and have eyes and senses and can often dodge a straight projectile. Okay, so if you can see a projectile moving straight at you, it's easier to dodge than if there's a curve on it. Now, in the modern world, many people's sort of subjection to this phenomenon would have been via the medium of football, commonly known in America as soccer, but known to the rest of the world as football. If you look at like David Beckham putting a ball into the corner of the net, curving the ball, and you see the same thing with tennis, with obviously top spin, backspin, all of these others, and side spin, anything else. You see it similar in, I think, in baseball and various other things. Cricket. If you can get any kind of curve on the projectile, it makes it more difficult for either the other human or the animal to predict its path. So, why would this be useful for hunting birds? Well, clearly they're going to be less able to predict its path, less able to dodge. You're more likely to hit one of them. Okay, so if you throw a curved path projectile into a flock of birds as they take off the edge of a lake or something, you're more likely to hit one of them if it goes in a curved path through the birds. Anyway, there we go. So I think that theory kind of stands fairly true. Be interesting to see if the experiments with replicas of this do actually do that. It certainly looks like a boomerang. Does it act like a boomerang? I don't know. Unlike the familiar, so we've read that. The archaeological context supports this interpretation. Animal remains found at the settlement include several species of water birds, while hunting may also have been an activity associated with the higher social status during the Iron Age. And so we see a lovely picture of the thing in the ground, and you can see it's very waterlogged conditions, absolutely perfect for preserving organic material, and it has these strips of iron mounted onto it. Now, then the question is, from hunting weapon to ritual offering, the story of the artefact may not have ended with hunting. It was found inside a ditch where its placement appears to have been deliberate, which was very common at the time, even to the point of putting things in bogs. For example, we see in places like Denmark, where bows and spears and sometimes even entire human bodies were put into bogs as offerings connected to their religions, which we don't really know anything about now. And the bogs preserve the things. So we've got bows, we've got Roman era swords, we've got, as I say, bodies, some of whom have clearly been sacrificed and killed before they put in. All sorts of stuff, arrows, preserved by these bogs in a similar condition to how this was protected, probably accidentally in this case. So it was found inside a ditch, could have been deliberate. Nearby archaeologists identified an extraordinary deposit combining an equid pelvis, so a horse pelvis, and a dog skull, together with pieces of whale rib, which I guess they could have been harvesting from what's now the English Channel, strengthening the possibility that this was part of a site of ritual function. Possibly, or was it a site of hunting and butchering process? Who knows? Ancient European throwing sticks were not unique to Gaul. So this is where it expands on. Comparable Iron Age examples have been identified in the Netherlands and Germany, while much older throwing sticks are known from prehistoric Europe. Yeah, there's a lot, actually, of what have been interpreted as throwing sticks. And as I say, we even know that these are still being used in historical times in Europe. Researchers have also connected such weapons with the Latin term catia, used by ancient writers for a curved Gaulish projectile. Now, I had never heard of that before. Had you? So later Franks were famous for the Francisca throwing axe, but I had no idea that there was a specific curved projectile referred to in association with the Gauls. The Urquhart-Naqueville find therefore does not prove that the Gauls used the same returning boomerangs associated today with Aboriginal Australian traditions. It does show something equally intriguing. Boomerang-like throwing weapons formed part of European hunting traditions thousands of years ago. Yeah, we already knew that, but this is a really cool example because it's got iron added on it. Again, I'll come back to that in a second. And survived into the world of Iron Age Gaul. Brilliant, and what a fascinating object. I would love to see replicas made of this. Now, let's look at the actual anatomy of the object. So it has iron, as far as I can see, added in currently in 4 places. However, it's possible that it's missing a piece. So you can see that it's got iron at each end, top and bottom, and iron in the middle. It then has iron about 2/3 of the way up one arm or wing, but not down the other one. Now, it's possible that the iron has just rotted away or fallen off. Maybe it was damaged even before it was put into this deposit. That leads us in 2 different directions. So first of all, why add iron to something which is spinning? Because it adds an awful lot of force to the impact, okay? Which to me would suggest one of 2 things. Either, for hunting, you want it to go further, because a wooden one would do the same job at close range, but an iron one would carry more momentum and therefore probably travel further, especially with the circular motion. Or this is a weapon and not a hunting implement. And, you know, very often in the world we see hunting implements reinforced and beefed up to be used as weapons. For example, taking a simple kind of stick and adding iron shodding it or lead loading it and this kind of stuff. So it's interesting. Is it a weapon? Is it a hunting implement? Is it both? It could be both. But the addition of the iron, as far as I have seen, is unique. And that's why I think it's worth making a video about it and making you aware of it. Fascinating thing. Anyway, I'd stick the link down below to the article. I've read it all out, so you already know it all, but you might want to go and have a little closer look and do a bit more digging for yourself. What I would say is we don't really know an awful lot about how the Gauls were fighting, for example, when the Romans turned up, and well, in their wars with the Romans, territorial wars with the Romans, except for from the Roman side. And so weapons like this, for all we know, they could have been a thing. They could, maybe this was a regular bit of Gallic equipment used in combat. Or maybe they were just for hunting. Who knows? Anyway, a fascinating thing. There we go. Did you know that Europeans had boomerangs? Did you know that other people all around the world had throwing sticks, and that sticks aren't just for hitting people with in the hand or animals with in the hand, but many sticks were specifically throwing sticks, and in some cultures they had one type of club for throwing and a different type of club for clobbering. Anyway, let me know down below. Did you know about these things? I think it's absolutely fascinating. I have been Matt Easton. I'll continue to be, and I'll see you back on the channel really soon. Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.